Hello and welcome to today's electronic design webcast. Our topic today is how pressure sensors overcome today's challenges in healthcare, sponsored by TTI and Honeywell. I'm Bob Vavra with Endeavor's Design and Engineering Group. Let's talk about how you can participate in today's presentation. If you have any technical difficulties during our session, simply type your issue into the Ask a Question box and a member of our team will assist you. You can also click on the question mark help button in the upper right corner of the screen. We also welcome your questions during our event today, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during the Q&A session that follows the main presentation, so feel free to send in your question at any time. To do so, simply type your question into the Ask a Question box and click on the Send button. If you'd like a copy of this presentation, please click on the Event Resources tab on the side of your screen to download the presentation. Also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Electronic Design website within the next week. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. So let's meet our presenters for today. Martin Murray is a global application engineer with 40 years of experience at Honeywell. He started his career spending 7 years in sensor testing and later spent 17 years in NPI engineering, where he specialized in the design of electrical circuits for pressure and airflow sensors. He spent the last 16 years as applications engineer for pressure force and airflow sensors. And Alfredo Arteta is the America's product manager for the healthcare vertical, responsible for the MEMS pressure, force, and humidity and temperature products. He has 16 years of experience in the electronic components industry, beginning his career with Mauser, first in sales and then product management, where he worked closely with Honeywell as their PM for nearly 9 years. In 2019, he joined Honeywell working inside sales before moving to the America's product manager role in August of 2020. So gentlemen, we're looking forward to today's presentation.
All right, thank you for the introduction. My name is Alfredo Arteta. I'm the America's product manager for board mount pressure and force. And later, Martin Murray, our global application engineer, will be speaking on some of the slides as well. So let's go over some timeline highlights with regards to sensors throughout history. For example, in 1594, Galileo obtained a patent for a machine to pump water. He obtained this patent for a machine to pump water from a river for the irrigation of land. The heart of the pump was a syringe. So he found that 10 meters was the limit to which the water would rise in the suction pump, but had no explanation for the phenomenon. So scientists were then devoted to find the cause for this. Later in 1644, Evangelista Torricelli, who was an Italian physicist, filled the tube, which was a meter long. It was hermetically sealed on one end with some mercury. He set it vertically with the open end in the basin of mercury. The mercury invariably fell to 760, leaving an empty space above its level. So he attributed the cause of the phenomenon to a force on the surface of the Earth. So without knowing where it came from, he also concluded that the space on top of the tube is empty. So since nothing was there, he called it a vacuum. Later, Blaise Pascal, who was a French philosopher and physicist, as well as a mathematician, heard about these experiments from both Galileo and Torricelli, and he wanted to search for reasons for their findings. So he conducted multiple experiments and helped come up with the concepts of force and pressure, which he calculated between a valley and a mountainside, trying to replicate and see where the findings for Galileo and Torricelli came about. Much later, if we fast forward about 300 years, the first pressure transducer was introduced, and these mechanisms were the movements of diaphragms, springs, or Bourdon tubes that are part of electrical quantity. And these pressure diaphragms are part of a capacitance, and the indicator movement is the tap of a potentiometer. Later in 1938, bonded strain gauges were independently developed by E. Simmons of the California Institute and A.C. Rouge of MIT. However, Simmons was faster to apply for the patent, so the patent is attributed to Simmons. In 1967, Honeywell at our research center in Minneapolis was the area for a patent application for an edge-constrained silicon diaphragm. By Art Zayas and John Egan. And then later, Hans Keller applied for a patent for the batch fabricated silicon sensor. Moving forward to 2000, the piezo-resistive technology was introduced, which is extremely universal. It applies for pressure ranges from 100 millibar to 1500 bar, and the absolute gauge and differential pressure modes. Slow spread of the technology, but in high volume applications for non-benign media resulted from the inability of US companies to develop decent housing. But in 30 years, Keller has perfected it in cost comparable to other technologies, making it a lot more amicable to multiple types of applications. Now moving forward to, obviously a very huge topic would be the COVID effect. These are recent headlines as you're seeing, so these are not from last year. These are pretty recent as far as new COVID cases. And then of course with the newer developments of for example, the Omicron variant, which are growing in a number of countries such as Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. Obviously, there's not a lot we know about since it is so recent, but it has prompted concern among scientists and public health officials because it has an unusually high number of mutations that have potential to make the virus more transmissible and less susceptible to existing vaccines. So the World Health Organization has called Omicron a variant of concern, and on Monday it warned, this past Monday, warned that the global risk posed by it were very high. So when it comes to findings of this type or variants that keep growing, such as the previous Delta variant, this is still part of the main COVID effect. And trying to find as to whether or not it's more transmissible, is it capable of causing more serious illness? So the speed by which we attack these illnesses and try and come up with vaccines and other ways to combat it is the speed by which we are able to use technology to get to eradicate these types of diseases. So the world has changed. Modern medicine is affording people longer and healthier lives, but for, like you mentioned, the coronavirus pandemic, it's forced medical companies and healthcare organizations to rethink how they tackle their biggest challenges. It really is a different place, and in this case, speed and portability are key due to the fact that obviously there's a lot of lack of space and capacity at medical facilities. So a lot of people are staying at home, being treated at home. So healthcare today, faster innovation, we'll go with that topic first, where it typically takes medical companies a long time to innovate, but the pandemic has created an environment where we have to respond much more quickly, truncated timetables. We were able to produce different vaccines in weeks as opposed to years. For example, a typical drug takes about 12 years to develop and bring to market, and in a current climate, there's just no way that's feasible. So it had to be done exponentially quicker. Other types of innovation, for example, there was a Taiwanese physician who created an aerosol box for patients to wear on their heads to help prevent the further spread of COVID. So we realized quickly how important it is to contain individuals, but doing it in an entire room may not be as feasible. But if you have, when you run out of space, but if you have a way to contain, obviously the breathing and the spread of the disease, then innovations like an aerosol box become necessary. Increase in 3D printing, face shields, and ventilator valves are practical solutions that came from an increased need for innovation during the time. So, and I'm sure that there will be additional innovations that come, because it does not look like COVID is going to go away any particular time soon. But as we continue to innovate, we will be able to get a better understanding and control, hopefully, over the pandemic. Technology and data, looking at connected devices. So cross-functional teams of physicians and scientists and web developers, they've quickly developed centralized data analytics to help monitor the spread. So the data analytics help with not just monitoring the spread, but creating a major database of information through collaboration. So collaboration is key across a wide range of disciplines for learning lessons by data-driven results. So authorities can provide official and timely information about COVID through digital platforms such as mobile apps, social media, which help flatten the curve. So it was proven that areas or countries that had a lot easier access to information and internet were shown to flatten the curve a lot faster, simply because they were able to get the information or go ahead and sign up for vaccines and things of that nature. So information has been very, very crucial throughout this pandemic. It has brought companies closer to patients, and it has highly impacted how we interact with them in both traditional and non-traditional environments, i.e. telehealth. So a patient wasn't just able to come into a hospital, they were also able to be treated at home, interact with their primary care physicians through video conferencing or any other websites and things of that nature. Increased communication between university and research and OEM manufacturers. So a lot of the study that was done through universities, they were able to collaborate with OEM manufacturers and try and be able to manufacture. So at the beginning, there was a lot of university research, and they were able to come up with different modified designs for ventilators, with OEM manufacturers and ramp up the production of ventilators more quickly to assist patients that were having breathing issues. So healthcare today. Modern medicine, so to reiterate the point from before, modern medicine is affording people longer and healthier lives, but the coronavirus pandemic has forced medical companies and healthcare organizations to rethink how they tackle their biggest challenges. So this is extremely important because we haven't had a challenge like this, I imagine, since the Spanish flu, but they did not have the means, technology, or resources that we currently do. So patient-centric care is definitely a trend and has become more important, more critical on a daily basis. So patient treatments to be provided at home, they allow for more acute hospital level care that's been proven effective and reducing complications while cutting costs, which is the Johns Hopkins model. The in-home patient care evolved in a big way in 2020 due to lack of hospital resources and bed shortages. So, but they have found that the at-home care has been extremely effective. So, and plus, if you can isolate these patients at home, then you will further help prevent the spread of COVID in public places, especially in hospitals. So some healthcare systems in the US, they've strictly cared for COVID patients at home for the first 10 days or until the worst part of their illness was over. So home diagnostics and expansion by major retailers and pharma companies, they've assisted with testing kits and vaccination distribution that has ease the burden off a lot of medical facilities like Doc in the Box or ERs and hospitals to help increase the numbers of people that have been vaccinated. So the future of healthcare. Since the world has changed, so have we. We continue to invest in technologies that will further develop new products in healthcare. The healthcare industry is constantly evolving to keep us with increasing regulatory pressures while maintaining an environment where patients and staff feel safe. Healthcare providers often struggle with developing the right approach to stay ahead of these challenges while delivering consistently great patient experience. From a patient's first visit to diagnostics, Honeywell has the technologies to help healthcare providers increase productivity and efficiency. So through our continued efforts with partnering with major healthcare device manufacturers and keeping an eye on trends, we feel that we are poised to definitely help further the cause and assist where we can with patients in this pandemic or healthcare in general. All right, so now we're going to look at some design considerations. The photo there is one of the eval kits that design engineers can procure from one of our distributors with regards to speeding up their design cycle. So with regard to designing in devices for a particular customer's device, our board mount pressure family is what is pictured here. So basically from left to right, from bottom to top, you will see our basic pressure sensors, which are unamplified and uncompensated, all the way up through to our TRUSTABILITY RSC sensors, which are 24-bit. They are high resolution and high accuracy. So since we have a wide breadth and portfolio when it comes to the board mount pressure family, it definitely will go ahead and take care of the majority of needs for a majority of applications, especially when it comes to the healthcare space. So there is a significant shift from pure analog architecture to digital architecture, and the first digital sensor was launched in the 1990s, and since then has become a larger part of the portfolio. And 95% of all our new product launches utilize an ASIC architecture. So as you can see, besides the ones I mentioned below that, you'll see MICROPRESSURE, and they will fit kind of neatly between the TSC and ABP series there. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Martin Murray to discuss current trends in design.
Thank you, Alfredo. Yes, if you look at the then and now of it, back in around 1985, the photo to your left was first introduced. It's a 163 PC series of sensor, and we still make that today because we still have some customers even using it. They love it. It's been designed in for numerous years, but it's in long-term applications such as ventilators and things like that, where it needs to have an exceptionally long design cycle. They really don't want. Doctors love the ventilators, and so they buy the old ventilators yet, and so we still furnish it. But if you look at the size of it, it's quite large compared to what we're doing today. It's 60 by 30 by 28 millimeter, versus now the MPR series is more of a 5 by 5 by 6 millimeter. So you have about a 70% area reduction between the two. So it's huge. And also in terms of weight, it's probably about 15-20x lighter at a minimum. So smaller size and weight for portability are becoming significant design considerations in many applications. And in some cases, it's an absolute must. So small size and weight for portability is critical, but you also have to remember that these things still need to be very reliable and very accurate. So the picture on the left on the 163 PC series is more of a 5% what we'd call total error band. And that means the entire sensor errors. That means the errors of calibration. That means the errors of interchangeability, the linearity, hysteresis, repeatability, the performance over temperature. All the errors combined, it's about no better than a 5% sensor. Whereas if you look at the bottom right, there you're starting to approach, depending which series you go into, more like the 1% or better, and in some cases 1.5, like the MPR series. So even though we've shrunk it down quite a bit, we've improved the reliability, and we've also improved the accuracy of the devices as time has gone on. That's critical. So now instead of having the end design engineer having to do an analysis tolerance stack up of all the sensor errors, we do that for you with one total error band. So that is significant. So it eliminates a lot of those type of discussions. Okay, how much is your offset? How much is your performance over temperature? So it gives the design engineers a much clearer picture of what of it. It's more of a plug and play type of device at that point. The other thing that's happened is on the device on the left, it was more of a 1 PSI device. And now on the now of it, we're producing sensors all the time at about plus or minus 1.5 inch of water. And that's about 1/30 of a PSI. So we shrunk it down, and we were also able to sense much lower pressure ranges if required. So that's the trend: smaller size, lower weight, lower power for more portable type of applications. Even in applications such as historic ones like a ventilator, if you look at the amount of equipment being introduced into the emergency rooms, the recoup rooms, and all that, they have so much equipment anymore that at one time they didn't care how much room the ventilator took. Now they do. So now all of a sudden size becomes a matter, even in historic applications where before it really wasn't a concern. The other trend we're seeing is that a lot of our customers are going more towards the manifold mount design. And what we mean by that is you have a sensor and you have an O-ring, and then you plug it into either a plastic or a metal manifold, rather than using the historic tubing type of method of attachment. The advantage of a manifold is it leads towards lean manufacturing. it leans towards smaller assemblies since you don't have tubing running all over the place, which takes up space. And it's lean because, and for poka-yoke, because you're less likely to flip a tube in the wrong spot. If you got 5 tubes and you put it to the wrong sensor, you've just created an issue in your assembly. So, this eliminates that particular type of event from occurring. And also, as I said, it leads towards smaller assemblies as well, which is a serious trend in the industry for that reason. And we find that a lot of our customers will do this, for pressures of 30 psi and above. They'll go to manifold anyhow because it's also a more reliable joint. You don't have to worry about leakage. Tubing, over time can split or crack. It vibrates around. You can start to have leaks where you didn't before. Whereas on a manifold O-ring seal, you just don't see that kind of problem. So we have a lot of our customers that prefer this anyhow for higher pressures, but we also see it a lot for lower pressures too, for the reasons I gave you. It's an easier way in production of interfacing to our devices. Current trends in design. We're seeing that a lot of our end customers are looking to get closer to the patient to take their measurements. The reason for that is it's a better measurement. You don't have a lot of errors introduced by long tubing. If you're trying to measure something 6 feet back in a ventilator, as an example, it's not the same measurement as if you're at the mask because of the pressure drop. When somebody breathes, it's not going to give you the same accuracy. So they're trying to get closer and closer to the patient to improve the accuracy. It also speeds up the response time so that they can change your decision making. If you have if you have to wait for the pneumatics to change or your air pressure to change in there by the patient breathing, and you have to wait 6 feet worth of tubing to get that answer, you're talking milliseconds, and you could have used that time to make your decision as to whether to increase the oxygen or whatever course of action you're going to take. So it's not as accurate if you do it inside the equipment as it is at the patient. That's the good news. The bad news is the closer to the patient that you are means you're going to run into moisture. There's condensation. There's patient breath, and it has humidity in it. And along that length of tubing, you can get condensation. So if you're back at the machine, they've got all kinds of filtering. It's 6 feet away. They actually heat the airflow. It's not an issue. But if you're right at the patient, which is the current trend, you're going to start running into some moisture potential concerns. So you want a sensor that can handle that. And we have a wet capable type devices, and we also have a wet for applications where you're measuring across something like across a filter or across an orifice. So having a wet capability is a must. And even if there isn't condensation, even if that isn't a main concern, we still have a lot of customers that will want that just because they don't have to stay up at night hoping that there's not some condensation that occurs or some potential issues stack up against you that all of a sudden you've got some liquid in there and it causes a sensor concern. We have an ABP2 wet capable, as I said. Our ABP and ABP2 series are both wet capable. How we do it is we have a gel ring, and we use that gel ring to contain the gel. So in other words, we fill the sensor after we've placed the die in ASIC and wire bonding and done all that type of work in the assembly. We put a gel ring down, and then we fill it with gel. And we could fill it with different types of gels for the application. We have a silicone, food grade silicone, as well as fluorosilicon available. So we can, in applications that have a lot of harsher chemicals, we can switch to a fluorosilicon, which is very good with and media robust to a lot of difficult chemicals, even up to including things like natural gas and gasoline and things of that nature. So certainly it's more than capable of handling saline and things like that as well. But how we do it by putting that gel ring and the gel on there before we put the top port is we visually know that, and we have better control over where the gel goes. So from a performance standpoint, it's much more repeatable. Also, we know before we put the cover on that we've covered everything. Well, what happens if don't cover the wire bonds and you put liquid in there, the sensor's gonna fail, right? So having that visual check is important. Very few customers do, or competitors do that. They do a blind fill, and then you don't know if everything's covered or not. It's just they throw some gel in at the very end. They inject some gel, and hopefully things are covered, but they don't really have any way of knowing if they are or not until you put liquid on it, and then potentially it's too late. So that's an improvement. Current trends in design. Obviously, we talked about battery applications and portability, which means you need to have low power for longer battery life. These things are running off, those little small lithium batteries or smaller. And so having a portable device, and that requires a long battery life so that they're not changing batteries out all the time. So we have this option as a configurable option in many of our series, and or it could be configured from a number of devices like our ABP, ABP2, or MPR series are all sleep mode type of devices. And there you're taking the battery usage when it's on from 3.5 milliamps, which doesn't seem a lot until you're using it with a battery, but then you can drop it down to about 45 nanoamps by doing that, by putting the device to sleep. So you take a measurement. After the measurement is taken, and it goes back to sleep automatically, and you're saving all that power and battery life. And it's just enough power on there that once you give it a signal to wake up, it wakes up, takes another reading. So you have a lot of control over the battery life depending on how often you have to sample the pressure in your application. One of the critical parameters of that is how quickly does the sensor wake up? Okay, it goes to sleep, but if it takes forever to wake up, it's going to be an issue. But most of our devices are able to wake up in around 2.5 milliseconds to be able to take another reading. So this is very important in applications like infusion pumps, oxygen concentrators, because they're shrinking them down all the time. An oxygen concentrator used to be a stationary item. It was very heavy, 40, 50 pounds, and it was about a 3 by 3 by 2 foot tall piece of equipment. So it wasn't portable at all. Now you see commercials for it on TV where it's in a very small battery pack. And the trend is to even go smaller than that, to go to more of a cell phone type size. I don't know if they'll ever get there or not, but it's very small. It's portable. It gives people their freedom back so they can have this oxygen supply and breathe when they go visit their grandkids, plays or the ball games, things like that. So it gives them their life back. So small size for battery operation is critical. And going forward, I think that they're going to try to shrink things down more and more and more. But when you do that, it still has to be very reliable, because if people require oxygen, if you cut it off from them, even for a brief period of time, it can be very significant. So it has to be very, very reliable to do that, because usually there's a very small backup oxygen supply with that. It gives people just enough notice, hey, you're going to have to leave the ball game now because you're going to run out of oxygen in a couple, in 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is. So, having a reliable sensor still is critical in these type of applications. Another trend, it's always been there, but I think it's even more important today, is reliability and proving that it's reliable. And we have a mean time to failure reports that we can give customers. It's very significant. It's usually included with a lot of our customers' FDA approvals. The numbers look great, and when you're talking to the FDA, and it's a critical component in many of these things, ventilators, oxygen concentrators, CPAP, they're all critical level type components. It's got to be very reliable because the patients need the therapy. That's why they have all this. So it still needs to be very reliable, and proving it to the FDA is very significant. It relieves a lot of headaches, because when the FDA goes through and they start looking at the life of the product, and is this thing going to be reliable, or is there going to be an issue with the customer or the patient in the field? They're going to look at information like that. We can provide it. We can even actually customize it to the end application. So in many regards, this is much less worry for the design engineers and also the approvals groups within companies and things like that. You just have this piece of paper where you put in your approvals submittal from the FDA or the agency, and it's just a very good document. It shows you've done due diligence. It's something we can easily provide for any of our products on pressure and airflow. And there again, it's just one more thing that shows the FDA and the agency approvals that you've done your homework and that it's a very reliable product. So medical applications. These are some of the medical applications out there. They're obviously not all of them. There's a huge breadth of different applications possible. But if you look at the top left, the ventilators, anesthesia equipment, obviously that's a very demanding applications, very accurate. They don't necessarily, small size is, as I said, it's important, but it's not as critical as, you go down to the bottom right and you get into the wearables and the consumer devices. The CPAP machine anymore, an oxygen concentrator, they want it to fit on your nightstand. And wearables, of course, are even the next level where you want to try to get to the equipment, like infusion pumps that are so small that they look about the size of a cell phone anymore, a lot of them. So a lot of these are, different applications within the medical field. They all require a reliable sensor. They all require a sensor that's going to be around for many decades of use. As I said, the 163 has been around since 1985, and we still produce it because there's a need for it. So you want a vendor that doesn't have a lot of churn in their product portfolio, because that's important, because you can't redesign these things out easily without doing another FDA type submittal. So these are all different things. Different applications require different sizes. They require different accuracies. They require different housing and porting type of options. So you really require a large portfolio to be able to meet all these application requirements and do it effectively, and do it in a manner that's reliable to the customer and accurate, and as I said, and small enough size to meet the applications. So they're all different, but they all point towards you really need a device that you've got a large portfolio in the portfolio for it, and you can meet all these different requirements with the pressure ranges that you've got available as well. Functional elements of blood testing equipment. This is kind of a significant, much more than it used to be with the COVID. A lot of the volumes on some of this equipment has taken off. You're producing many more times that were built just even a few years ago by medical OEMs. So the demand is certainly much larger now than it was a couple of years ago for some of this equipment. So benchtop analyzers, a portable point of care thing, and cassette analyzers, there's kind of an offshoot, because once you start having medical issues, there's a lot of different diagnostics that come into play, rather than just detecting if you've got a virus or bacterial infection, things of that nature. All of a sudden, you've got all this other testing that's required as well. So you see that the trend is towards mass production, a lot of this equipment. Where you're actually looking at the blood testing itself, you've got temperature control units, you've got aspiration and mixing, you add a sample, and then you actually have to add reagents as well. So there's a number of features that go on even in the small piece of equipment. You need the right sensor in a small size to accommodate all this. So that's where you need a large portfolio, because in this case you're looking at a certain range. It's got to be liquid compatible. It's got to be small. You don't want a lot of dead space. I know you don't use the term dead space, but basically that means that the amount of area you've got in the sensor has to be very small, so that you're not trapping bacteria, as well as you're not using a lot of the reagents. In other words, reagents that they use in this are extremely expensive. So you want a small internal volume of the sensor, or dead space, so that you're not wasting that reagent. Some of those reagents can be tens of thousands of dollars in cost. So having a low dead space sensor is critical in something like this as well. Molecular diagnostics, hard to say. It's the same. Demand has increased quite a bit on this type of equipment, because as I said, that when people become sick, a lot of different techniques and things need to be employed to figure out what's going on and things of that nature, in terms of infections, in terms of, are you genetically more inclined to get this disease, that type of stuff. So it increases the need for a lot of different sensors. And so having a vendor that has not only a broad pressure portfolio, but a broad sensor portfolio in general is critical on this. Optimizing the sensor and the accuracy of the application, extremely important. In order to do that, what you really require is you require a vendor with a lot of different pressure ranges and types. And what I mean by that is having one large sensor go, from 100 psi down doesn't do as well as if you've got a 1 psi type of sensor. In other words, it's matched to the application. If you only require a 0.7 psi, you don't want a 5 psi sensor or 15. You want a 1 psi or maybe even a 160 millibar or something like that. Something matched much closer to what your usage range is. And by doing that, by matching it closer, you're going to have a much better total error band in the sensor, and you're also going to have a much better overall error band in your overall assembly and in your overall piece of equipment that you're manufacturing. So having a vendor with a large pressure portfolio is significant in terms of not just form factors, but also in terms of pressure ranges. Just having a lot of different options that you can match things better. Unfortunately, sometimes pressure sensors and others are overlooked until towards the end of the design, and there you've kind of designed yourself in a corner. So if you have a vendor with a large pressure portfolio, you can kind of design yourself out. In other words, if you require certain porting or things like that, or pressure ranges, we can accommodate all that. We have a lot of options on this. This is just part of it, and it's not showing all of them even. So we have a lot of different porting and housing options in terms of dip, surface mount, leadless surface mount, SIP packages, axial ports, radial ports, radial barb ports, radial barbless ports. So depending on how you wanted to make your pneumatic connection, we're very flexible, and that gives the design engineer maximum flexibility in their design of how they want to plumb this thing pneumatically to get the air or liquid to the sensor. In a lot of cases they can only come in from the top. They don't have room on the sides. Or a lot of cases they can only come in from the side. They can't come in from the top. Well, we have this option available already. We thought of that already. So we're giving you a lot of different options available on this. And the other thing we do is, we have a lot of options. We have, as I said, we have housing options, porting options, diagnostic options, if you want diagnostics or not. Is it so wet capable or dry? Do you want a food grade for a gel, or do you want a fluorosilicon gel, depending on what your media is, the fluorosilicon being very robust for different applications. But we also have food grade. So if it's in contact with water, things like that, it's compatible with getting FDA approvals for that. We also have options for pressure ranges, as I spoke of, and different pressure types. And by that, I mean a gauge, absolute, or differential pressure can be measured by our sensors. Depending on what your needs are, we have different sensors to optimize the range. That helps optimize the range as well. Because if you have a bidirectional pressure, you'll have to use a bidirectional pressure range device. But if you're using it as gauge and the only option is bidirectional pressure, well, you've just cut your resolution in half. So that's not good. So we give you a lot of options on that. In addition, we also have a millivolt amplified volts DC type of output. We also offer digital ice quartz here SPI. So we're very flexible, even in terms of the output, how you want to connect this thing electrically to the sensor. Do you want to do it digitally, or you want an analog signal, things of that nature? We also offer different supply voltages that are available as well. So we have a lot of built-in flexibility on this to optimize, your assemblies. So by picking the right sensor, we can optimize your design a little bit in your assemblies. I turn it back over to Alfredo.
Thanks, Martin. I appreciate it. So the micropressure platform, to add on to the two platforms Martin was just speaking about, which was the TRUSTABILITY and ABP, the micropressure platform, which fits neatly just below the ABP line. It's a proprietary Honeywell technology. It's extremely small footprint, only 5 by 5 by 3. And it has industry-leading stability as well as industry-leading total error band. It's made for high volume opportunities, and due to its accuracy, and again, as I mentioned, total error band, it makes it a great fit for high volume opportunities. It's also insensitive to mounting orientation, so it lets the customers optimally position the sensor in the system. And I will ask Martin, is there any specific platform, is there any specific device, or is there a specific area of healthcare where micropressure would be more beneficial than anything else in our portfolio?
I'd have to say wearables, significant ones like oxygen concentrators, as well as maybe infusion pumps, things of that nature. And also these are wet capable too. So if some liquid gets in there, that's not a problem, as I said. So those are this is the trend. This is the future. In particular, the MPR series meets those requirements.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's talk about a couple of different applications that, for example, the hematology analyzer. So as Martin mentioned before, a lot of this machinery, there's a greater need due to the current pandemic. So a hematology analyzer, not only is there an opportunity for sensors to be in there, but as you can see on the slide, this is a very sensor-rich application, and there's lots of opportunity for other Honeywell technologies to be present, even switches. So basic and push button switches, rockers, magnetic sensors, force sensors, barcode scan engines, and temperature sensors as well. So a design engineer and purchasing agent or manager would be looking to have fewer vendors as possible, and we can meet the needs because we have a massive portfolio just beyond our pressure portfolio. So we can, depending on the application, almost be an end-to-end solution on a lot of the different aspects of a design. So we can increase throughput on testing, as well as just minimize the number of vendors. Then it'd be a lot more efficient for a design engineer and a purchasing agent. Lab automation. Lab automation is obviously a huge part of how we have arrived at getting a vaccine and testing and treating other illnesses. And I feel like lab automation is going to be a much bigger area as far as the total available market, and for the near future and future to come, just because of how important it has been throughout it's always been important, but obviously much more so within the last couple of years. Again, this is another sensor-rich application. As you can see, this one has airflow sensors as well as board mount pressure, basic switches again, and barcode scan engines. So a lot of the devices, if you have a client that's asking for a specific, if we can get what else the device is doing, what is the application, then there might be an opportunity to have additional technologies from ourselves added to that device for that end customer. And if we can get designed in, there'll be increased longevity and a much more strengthened relationship with that end customer. Resources. So resources that you can visit with regards to getting additional information on medical applications or our products themselves. You can visit the Honeywell Advanced Sensing Technology website, honeywellsensing.com. You can visit the TTI website, the medical TTI Inc.com website as well, which a lot of these materials are also included on. You can see we also have development boards, the SEK 001, 002, SEP 001, and 002 that help design engineers gather information that they're testing information in minutes as opposed to a much longer time frame, helping them get to that solution a lot faster. We also have brochures, tech notes, and app notes available on those sites as well. And I'll ask Martin if there's any other points on the dev boards or anything on the actual solutions that you may want to add to.
Yeah, as you spoke of, it certainly helps speed up the design engineer's ability to evaluate our product. They don't have to develop any software at all to look even at a digital output device, because they can literally plug this into an Arduino Uno device, and it'll have a cable right to the through the USB port to the computer. They can graph out the data, they can save the data, they can look at things in real time if they want to. Real events, they can plug it in their system, and they don't have to do any software development to do that. Several of our different series, it isn't involved to design in the software to be able to use the sensor, and this circumvents all that, and they can actually evaluate the sensor in probably 5 minutes, where it might take a week or more to develop the software to look at things. So this really speeds up the design cycle for our customers.
Thanks, Martin. All right, it looks like it's time for questions, so let's see if there are any questions out there.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for that presentation, and we'll be getting to the questions here in just a moment. We have a number of questions come in from the audience. If you'd like to submit a question, type it into the Ask a Question box and hit the Send button. Also, please take a moment to complete the feedback form that'll be located at the bottom of your screen. A number of questions have come in from the audience. We want to get to those at this point. First of all, for Martin and Alfredo, what's the tightest total error band that's available?
On our RSC series sensors, it depends on the pressure range that you're using it over, but it's generally as good as 0.75% FSS for the RSC series, but it really does depend on the pressure range. Some of the lower ranges, it's a little bit harder to get to that value, but it is our lowest range device that we have. The other thing is that if you can use what's called an auto zero, in other words, if you can take a new zero in your system at some point, you can actually improve the total error band significantly, because a lot of the errors are in the offset. So if you can take a new 0 point, maybe at startup or maybe at some point during the operation, you can improve it to as good as a 0.5% or 0.25%, depending on the pressure range. So it can become a very, very accurate device if you can use an auto zero.
Good. This is a good question, because this may have changed. It may not have changed over the last 2 years through the pandemic. What's the most requested product for medical applications?
I believe it's probably I can let Alfredo talk if he wants on that one.
Well, in the last couple of years, it's been the ABP and ABP2. Right. A lot of it mainly because of versatility, price point, and it is a platform, so there are multiple options. We've had a couple of different options come out within the last year, so different gel options as far as wet capability and food grade capability as well. And I'll let Martin add to it if you'd like.
Yeah, the ABP series offers a lot of different options, and it's a very accurate product. It's a little bit smaller than the TRUSTABILITY series, so it tends to be very well liked. But it's still got the high reliability and that you require in the application. So it tends to be a very, very commonly requested device, especially when another question that came in about the availability of the silicon in that and things of that nature, and our ability to respond to that. We have a little bit more throughput on the ABP series since it's a little bit newer device. So when we were being pushed to get sensors for ventilators and CPAP and oxygen concentrators, that tended to be one of our go-to products a lot as well, is because we have a little bit more throughput through our factories. So since it's a little bit newer device, so it tended to be the ABP device. Going forward, I think the ABP2 is going to be very, very high volume as well.
Very good. Are you finding that your end users are coming up with uses and applications for these products that maybe weren't in the initial specs, but they're coming back and saying, "Boy, we can use them in different ways"?
Yeah, we're running into that all the time. I'm amazed at basically every day I come in, there's somebody using a pressure sensor in a way that I hadn't really envisioned or the team hadn't envisioned. There's a lot of creativity out there. The good news is that the sensors are generally capable of it. It's a well-designed product. It can be used in other applications other than medical in terms of the temperature range, shock, and vibration. So it fits into a lot of different applications. So if you got somebody out there that's very creative and wants to put a sensor in there, certainly, we've been doing that for a number of years, and it's always kind of exciting to see something new going on. But the fact that we're coming out with newer products that are smaller, battery operated, things like that, I think it's kind of getting everybody's creative juices up a little bit, and we seem to be running into a lot of really neat applications.
Yeah, very often your customers are your best R&D department.
Yes, very much so.
What's the typical lifespan of the product series?
In terms of the mean time to failure, or in terms of how long do we keep the products around? Would be the question back to the, in terms of how long we keep the products around, we keep them around quite a while, and because we're in a lot of medical applications, and a lot of them have, 8 to 10 years of design life. They envision when they come out with it that, it's going to be around 10 years. Well, 10 years turns into 12 or 15 sometimes, and as I said during the presentation, we've had the same sensor out there since 1985 because it's still needed. People get used to, a lot of the doctors get used to using a certain brand of equipment, and they're not going to redesign the equipment out. They don't have to, so they try to have vendors that have sensors around that could be around for that long, 10 to 12 years or better. In terms of reliability, the sensors are going to outlast myself. Basically, a lot of the mean time to failures are that you're going to run into. A lot of our series are in excess of 50 years of use on them. So it's very much going to be as long or longer than the design engineers envision the equipment's going to be in use. So we exceed their requirements in terms of the reliability of the product as well.
Let's talk about the wet-capable devices. Can they be used with saline solutions?
Yes, they can. That's very commonly used in medical media, as you can imagine. And we've tested for hundreds of hours at 2% saline powered up under a variety of different conditions, pressure cycling, things of that nature. So it's robust to the saline and some other chemicals depending on what gel option you select. If it's a silicone option, salines and some alcohols and things of that nature, as you might find in medical applications. If you need something a little bit more robust that we're coming out with and do have in some series already, fluorosilicon gel. It's very good against media as harsh as gasoline, which is pretty aggressive, and some of the solvents, even some of the benzene type of and toluene type of substances, depending on the application.
Very good. Got time for a couple more here. What's the lowest pressure range that you can do the sensing at?
Presently, we're at about a plus or minus 0.5% on some of our series. That's about as low as we've been asked to go. But there's a lot of applications out there like that. If you're trying to accurately monitor the filter clogging, as an example, you're looking for very, very, very minute changes in pressure. The filter might have a pressure drop of 0.3, 0.4 inches of water, but you're trying to determine if it's clogged, and that can be like a 0.01 inches of water. So you require a sensor with a very small range to start with, and it's got to have a lot of resolution and accuracy in the low ranges. And we've gone as low as 0.5%, or half inch of water, actually.
Good. Arturo, or Alfredo, excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Any other thoughts on what we've seen over the last couple of years? Some of the things that you've been left with in terms of impressions of how this vertical market has performed over the last couple of years. What are some of the things that you've seen that have been impressive and exciting as we've faced this pandemic?
What's most impressive is how quickly we've been able to, companies have been able to, as far as collaborate and, release information or come together to increase how fast something may come out. So it shows that even in a truncated timetable, we can go ahead and, be creative in a sense that we can help find solutions for something as horrible as what's going on and helping people in a faster manner because, I think I mentioned in one of the slides, typically, drugs and so forth, some of those take just years for them to come out. So for us to be able to, analyze and create, vaccines and additional tools and so forth to help spread the vaccine as well as maybe shorten the lifespan of this horrible pandemic, I think is extremely impressive and unprecedented because obviously they didn't have anything remotely like this for 100 years ago for the Spanish flu. Had they, I think they would have been able to see a much shorter timetable on that as well.
How about from your perspective, Martin?
Yeah, I think the most impressive thing is, with what's been going on the last several years, there's been a lot of push, and there were a lot of long discussions with a lot of different people who normally weren't in the ventilator type of a field, and all of a sudden they're being pressed to try to make one. It was kind of interesting. Or they would take an old design that was obsolete, and they gave it out to people, other people to use to try to make ventilators on their own, or respirators. And it involved a lot of sensors we hadn't made in a while. So it was very interesting and time for us. And I think that we responded pretty well. And in some cases, we resurrected some old designs we hadn't built in a number of years. So it was very interesting. It was a big push to do that. There were a lot of discussions, especially with some universities and that never done anything like that. So it was kind of a collaborative effort, and it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work.
Absolutely. Well, the work continues, but we've run out of time for questions today. If we didn't get to your question, we will be getting back to you via email. So that concludes our presentation. On behalf of Electronic Design, I'd like to thank Martin and Alfredo for their presentation, and thank TTI and Honeywell for sponsoring today's event. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and stay safe out there.